the lymphatic system is what we're going to be talking about next. It's chapter 21, which is basically the lymphatic system and the immune system. So both of these systems, although separate, worked intimately together. So lymph is basically the fluid that is inside lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes. So both of these together make up the lymphatic system. So there. There are basically three roles of the lymphatic system. All right, the first one is to return fluid to the heart. All right, the second thing that it does is that it helps large molecules enter the blood. And large molecules meaning large hormones, okay, or hormones that just won't fit into capillaries, and lipids. And lipids are definitely large molecules that can't fit into capillaries, so they have to get in another way, and they do that through the lymphatic system. The third thing the lymphatic system does is it has its role in the immune system is immune surveillance. So it provides a place for white blood cells to locate pathogens. Okay. All right. So what is the lymphatic system? So the point of the lymphatic system mainly is to return fluid to the heart. So this is fluid that comes out of capillaries at capillary beds, and that ends up left in the interstitial spaces. So if we look at where all this is coming from, so if I have my heart, so blood is going to leave the heart and it's going to go through, a bunch of distributing arteries and whatever, blah, blah, and eventually it's going to enter arterioles that are going to feed into capillary beds. All right, and once they go into the capillary beds, they're going to within the capillary beds, they're going to provide, nutrient exchange. So, oxygen, glucose, whatever. It's going to give out nutrients and it's going to take on wastes. All right, so if we show that here, so here's some tissues, right? These are with the capillary bed, so here's my little tissues. And as the blood is flowing through that capillary bed, as we've talked about, we've got hydrostatic pressure, which is basically blood pressure, is pushing stuff and fluids out. So it's pushing fluids out of the capillary bed into the interstitial spaces. And with that, gets pushed out, maybe some proteins, maybe some albumin or whatever, some ions. We've also got, oxygen and carbon dioxide moving back and forth, through diffusion and stuff like that. So we've got all that going on. Because remember, capillaries. So if we look at a capillary here, just don't forget, the capillary is one cell layer thick in its walls, those squamous cells, the endothelium, and they're kind of leaky, right? So as blood is coming through here, we've got stuff coming out, okay, into the interstitial space. All right, and of course we know that there's osmotic pressure, that it's bringing much of that fluid back in. So the osmotic pressure, the reversal, or what's going against it, is bringing fluid back into the cell or the vessel, okay? But not all of it gets back in there, okay? About 20 liters basically seep out. In a 24-hour period, we lose about 20 liters of fluid. About 17 liters is reabsorbed. So it goes back in. So that leaves a net, what we call a net filtration of fluid of 3 liters that ends up in the interstitial space. So the lymphatic vessels are there to pick that up, to make sure that we don't accumulate even more and it stays there. Then we'd get all swollen, and that would cause some major problems. So, get my colors good here. All right. So back to here, this little picture, we'll go ahead and finish it. So we've got our venous system that comes back and dumps into the right side of the heart, the right atrium. Okay. Well, that's the circulatory system. It's in a circle, starts at the heart, goes down through arteries, down into the capillary beds, and then returns back to the heart. It's like a big circle. The lymphatic system basically is a bunch of this isn't a very good picture, but it's a bunch of vessels that are kind of wrapped around these capillary beds, and they function to absorb, bring in the fluid that's left over in that interstitial space. Okay, the capillaries themselves are made, their structure has these little flaps. And these little flaps have little collagen anchors to them. This isn't really that important, but little collagen anchors that when pressure is higher on the outside, it opens these doors and fluid comes in. When the fluid fills this up and there's pressure in here, it closes those doors back. Okay, and anything can go in, so it's going to sop up the fluid and maybe some proteins that are there that seeped out, ions, whatever's there can go in there. All right, so these vessels then remove the fluid and start to carry it back to the circulatory system. And what they do is they have some stops along the way that we call lymph nodes. And those lymph nodes, so these guys here, function to clean the stuff, get the junk out of it. In those lymph nodes are going to be cells like macrophages and lymphocytes that are looking for things like bacteria. Lymphocytes are looking for their antigen, okay, which is something that stimulates the immune system. It's looking for antigens on pathogens in order to connect with them so that they can dispose of them. So that's what they do within the lymph nodes here. So eventually it pumps up and comes in here and then dumps into the circulatory system. So there's two main ducts that this stuff gets pumped into. One of them is the right lymphatic duct, and it will dump into the right subclavian artery. I'm sorry, right subclavian vein. Okay, so that's here. It's going to drain the right side, the right upper side of the body. The thoracic duct, so that's the first one, and then the thoracic duct will drain into the left subclavian vein. Okay, so that will drain the rest of the body, and it dumps in there. Once it goes in there, it goes into the veins and then eventually into the heart, and it's part of the circulatory system. It's part of the blood again. And the benefit to that is not only to make sure that we don't swell up from having too much fluid in the interstitial space, but it also keeps blood volume where it should be. All right, the lymphatic system is made up of lymphoid organs and these organs are there to help deal with the yucky things that are coming through in the lymph. Okay, so we've got basically diffuse lymphoid tissue, and these are just cells. These are just cells that are within the tissues, especially like the digestive tract and the respiratory tract, that look for, yucky things. And then, of course, we have the lymph nodes, which we just talked about. So lymph nodes are basically balls of cells and proteins. And again, they look for pathogens. And they have cells like T cells and B cells and macrophages that will deal with the junk that comes through there. All right, so that's the basics of the lymphatic system, and we're going to move on to the immune system, which utilizes things like the lymph nodes in order to be able to have a place in order to function. Okay? So the next video will start the immune system.